Hello, class. This is Dr. B, Dr. Craig Bythewood, addressing my favorite Vietnam MBA corporate finance class. So listen, I want to be very clear about what the purpose of this video is. This is not the second video. This is the follow-up to the first video. So know that we will still have our second video at the same time addressing the next set of information. This is you doing exactly what I asked you to do. I asked you to reach out to me if you had any questions about the material that we covered before for the first assignment, and many of you asked me questions that I'm now going to address. And I also want to make this part clear. I am well aware that those of you that have submitted Unit 2, I have not graded it, and this is my thinking. If I say something in this follow-up that makes you realize that you left something out or you could add something to your submission, I want you to have the opportunity to do so. So what I'm going to do is, the moment that this video is uploaded into the actual class itself, 24 hours after that, I will allow you to resubmit it. Okay? So that's the way I'm going to handle that. And then 24 hours after that is when I'm going to go ahead and grade those submissions that are already there. So I'm going to cover two specific topics. The first specific topic is about the ratios. I've received numerous questions, even from an academic assistant, about the fact that there's an issue between, hear this, calculating the ratio and explaining the ratio. And one of the comments that was made to me, actually this comment was made twice, we already have the calculation. I don't care about the calculation. The calculation is not what's being asked for. Do you have to have a calculation? Yes. But what the problem or what the assignment asks for is for you to explain the ratio. What the assignment asks you to do is to talk about the company in terms of the ratio. And you don't talk about a company by looking at a calculation. You talk about a company by interpreting the calculation. So understand that your goal is to do more than say the current ratio is 7. What does that mean? What you have to do is understand what each ratio represents. What is it communicating? What is it saying to you? I have a perfect example to make this make sense. I am 215 pounds. I went to the doctor today and that's what I weighed in, 215. Now, when I was in high school, I wanted to play football and I wanted to gain weight. So when I was in the 9th grade, I weighed 115. Then in the 10th grade, I weighed 135. In the 11th grade, I weighed 155. Then my senior year, I was 175. So if I could have got to 215 when I was in high school, I would have loved that. That would have made me a better football player. But as heavy as I could get was 175, and that was up from 115. So it's not about those numbers, it's about what those numbers meant. 175 was how much I weighed coming up from 115. And 175 was lighter than I would love to have been. I would love to have been this size as a senior. Now, 2009, I had a brain tumor. And the brain tumor added 55 pounds to my body frame. I was as heavy as 270 pounds. So now I'm going down in direction. I went from 270 to where I am now, which is 215. So again, it's not about the number, it's about the direction of the number. And then you look at 215, and if you look at, say, a chart that shows the average weight of a person, it will show that I'm overweight. But I'm not overweight. I just happen to have a big frame and I lift weights. Right above, throughout that door is a gym where I lift weights. So 215 doesn't mean anything unless you put it in perspective. So I just gave you a whole bunch of calculations. 115, 135, 155, 175, 215, 270. But the calculation doesn't mean anything. The interpretation of what it means is what's important. And we can go even deeper. Every one of those numbers was in pounds. Well, what if instead I did it in what is it called? Oh my gosh. KLs, KLBs, the metric version of it. So whatever the metric version is, then that would be totally different because 175 will have a different number. So you see how I'm doing all this interpreting and all of this discussion and all of this analysis about my body, but I'm not talking about how I calculated it. I didn't address how I got on the scale. I didn't talk about the way the scale calibrates it and determines my weight. What I did was interpret what that weight means. And 175 in high school means something totally different than 175 today. So just understand, I'm looking for the interpretation of the number, not just the number itself. So one of the comments that I received was, we're confused about the ratios. No, you're not. You're not confused about the ratios. You just have to spend the time and energy to understand what the ratio means. Let me give you another example. I just said I came from the doctor today, so I've been thinking about you guys all day because I thought of another example. In order for them to check me and tell me that I was in excellent physical condition, 52 is the new 22, they had to say to me, they had to do different tests. So they did the blood pressure, and it came out to be a number. Then, of course, they took my weight. That came up to be a number. And then they took my temperature, and that came up to be a number. Now, understand, those numbers by themselves don't mean anything. Blood pressure, weight, temperature. But here are two ways that we can describe those numbers. Number one, we can talk about what's normal for me. And we can say, hey, your blood pressure is higher than it used to be. We can say, hey, your blood pressure went down a whole lot between what it was. We could also say, this blood pressure number that you have is much larger than the average for people your age. Hey, this blood pressure is really smaller than most people your age. The temperature that you have is too high for you living in Florida. The temperature is too low, you must not be feeling well. Let's give you some iron. So you see my point? I've just given you two examples where the calculation, the number doesn't matter. You have to interpret it. And in both of those situations, I interpreted the number two ways. Number one, I talked about what it was over time. Number two, I talked about what it was cross-sectionally, or versus other human beings, or versus other ages, or versus other people my age. So these terms don't matter, but just to put them in perspective, when you analyze a number over time, it's called time series analysis. But when you measure something across different things, it's called cross-sectional analysis. So it is your goal to take each one of those ratios and understand what the calculation means. Now I'm going to do one right now off the top of my head. I used to be a consultant for a bank. And when I was a consultant for a bank, one of the things that banks spend a lot of time talking about was a ratio that's called debt to income. Debt to income. And the reason why banks spend a lot of time talking about that is because they wanted to analyze whether the person who was applying for the loan had a good number to be able to get the loan. Now let's first talk about where these two numbers come from. Debt divided by income. Well, when I talked about the balance sheet last week, debt was one of the balance sheet items. That's how much you have borrowed. Income is how much you make. Now, there's no item on the income statement that's called income, but this is what we use personally for consumers, for individuals who are borrowing money. And this will be the same thing as the revenue or the sales. So you can think of this as how much money a person makes. Now, I haven't given you a single number. This is not about a number. This is about a concept. This is about an analysis. So let's think about it. I'm taking how much money you borrowed, and I'm looking at how much money you make. Now think about it. If this number is higher, that means for the level of money that you make, you sure have borrowed a lot of money. Or for the amount of money you borrowed, you sure do make a small amount of money. Let me do that again. If this number is higher, I can say, wow, for the amount of money you make, you sure have borrowed a lot of money. Or I could say, for all of the debt that you have, for all the money you borrowed, you sure do make a small amount. So whichever way I interpret it, it's the number that's important. Now, if this number is really low, I can say, wow, you've only borrowed a little bit of money based on how much money you make. Or based on how little you borrowed, you certainly make a lot. So think about it. If this number is bigger, it's worse. If this number is smaller, it's better. So that's your first question with the ratio. Not what the calculation is. That part's easy. That's just division. The question is, how do I interpret the ratio? And I just broke down the interpretation of this ratio. So if I'm the bank and all of you are applying for a loan, this is how I look at it. You already have a lot of debt. So I don't know if I want to borrow or lend money to you. Let me start over since I messed up. I'm thinking about lending you some money. You already have a lot of debt. So I don't know if I'm going to lend you money when you already have a lot of debt. I can also say this. This income is what you're going to use to pay off the loan. Every month you're going to give me a payment out of here. So again, if this number is high, that means that's high and that's low. Numerator, denominator. If this number is high, that means that's high, that's low. That's the denominator. So I have two ways of looking at this, and I still haven't looked at a single number. I don't care about the number. I care about the interpretation. If I'm going to loan you money and you have a lot of debt already, I don't know. If you're making a small amount of money and you're going to use this money to pay the loan, I don't know. So the lower this number is, the better. So what I've done is prove to you that it's not about the number. It's about the direction. It's about the interpretation. How do I analyze what this number is? So if you look at the actual assignment itself, the assignment says, explain how the company is doing based on the ratios. Again, I went to the doctor today. They measured my numbers and then they told me how I was doing based on the numbers. Your numbers look good. You're doing well. Hey, you know what? Some of your numbers are pretty high. We need to change your diet. We need to give you some medicine. And just for the record, I don't take medicine, but that's not the point. The point is that the doctor is going to look at the numbers and then understand how to interpret the numbers, make a determination of, watch this, how healthy I am. Exactly. That's what you, my favorite Vietnam class, that's what you're going to do with the numbers. You're going to look at the ratios and determine, is the company healthy? How are they doing? One of you emailed me and asked the question, which ratio is the most important? No such thing. It depends on the situation. That's like saying, which one of those three things, blood pressure, weight, or temperature, is the most important? It depends on the situation. If I've been obese for a long time, then maybe weight's the most important. If my entire family suffers from blood pressure, maybe blood pressure is the most important one. So you don't walk in thinking this is the most important ratio. What you do instead is analyze the company, and then you determine what you think is most important for that situation. So again, I hope I've been clear, which is that what we do with these ratios is explain them, is understand them, is interpret them. The calculation is not the most important part. It's the least important part. Once you get a number, you need to talk about what it means. And again, you compare that number, you compare that ratio in two ways: over time and cross-sectionally against different companies. I hope that that is clear. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is bonds. I've received several questions in which you all have been very aggressive about the formula. What's the formula? Which formula do I use? Is this formula correct? If you take my advice, you should never have to do a formula in this class. What you should have to do instead is understand the relationship that the formula is telling you. One email, actually 2 people emailed me the equation of a bond, and it's a very aggressive, a very complex formula with summations and 2 different expressions, and that's the hard way of doing it. Because if you think about what I said in my initial video, I suggested to you, when you do time value of money, find an app. Find an application that you can put on your phone. Oh, I don't have a phone. Okay, well, go on a website that has a financial calculator or a time value of money calculation, or use a spreadsheet. It does not make sense to manually do problems in this class. Why not? Well, think about it. What degree are you getting? You're getting an MBA. You're getting a master's in business administration, which means you're going to get this degree and then you're going to be a leader in business. You're going to be a manager. You're going to be a CEO. You're going to open up your own business. Nobody who has a leadership role ever sits down with a pen and paper and writes down a formula. What they do is understand the logic of the numbers, and then they provide those numbers to a software, to a calculator, to a spreadsheet. Then when the numbers come out, then they interpret them and they analyze them. So you are, in my opinion, wasting your time, spending time analyzing the formulas. Look at the formula as a way to be a mathematical representation of what you're doing. So when you look at the bonds, it should be about doing the time value of money, not calculating the formula. So think about it like this. There are 5 variables for a bond, and only 5. The first variable is what we're calculating, and that's this, PV. PV stands for present value. Then, let me move over a little bit so you can see the board. PV, present value. Then you have N. N is the number of periods. Then you have future value. Future value is the amount of money that you're getting paid back. Let's put some commas in here. Then you have payment. Payment is the amount that you're going to receive in interest every period. Then finally, you have the interest rate. Now, that's it. There are 5 variables. I have not put any formulas on the board. I'm not trying to analyze the summation. I'm just recognizing that there are 5 variables. If you've never encountered time value of money, do a couple of Google searches on time value of money so you get an understanding of it, and know that your book talks about it. And you're using time value of money to take variables you have and find the ones that you want. So there are only 5 variables here. This is the price of the bond. This is the value of the bond. This is how many periods are left in the bond. This is you getting paid back. And this one's easy. It's always going to be 1,000. Why? Because in the original transaction, I explained to you before, the company borrows $1,000 and they pay it back. That's the payback. Then you've got the interest payment. Remember, I told you, the company that borrows the money does two things. Pay you interest, pay you back. Pay you interest, pay you back. Pay you interest, pay you back. So instead of analyzing these long formulas, just understand the logic of what I just said. Here are the two things. They're the two things. They're going to pay you interest, they're going to pay you back. They're going to pay you interest, they're going to pay you back. They're going to pay you interest, they're going to pay you back. Now it's only two more things. One, well, how many times are you going to pay me? This many times. And the only other thing is, what are interest rates right now? Remember, we talked about interest rates going up, and then we talked about interest rates going down. That's what this I is for. This I is going to reflect interest rates going down and interest rates going up. And you put these four variables in, solve for that. There is no reason for you. I'm not even going to waste our time writing this on the board. There's no reason to analyze that long formula that says summation, I, T, and hear me, T and N are the same thing. N stands for number of periods. T stands for time. Isn't that the same thing? Number of periods and time are the same thing. So some books use N, some books use I. Some books use R for rate of return instead of I for interest rate. Doesn't matter, same thing. So two things I want you to walk away with right now. Two things. Number one, to find the present value, which is what we're doing here. Put in the future value, put in the interest payment, put in the number of periods until it matures, put in whatever the current interest rate is right now, solve for present value. That's it. That's way easier than those formulas that you guys email me. Second thing, I received an email today. Actually, I received 3 emails today asking this question. How do I find yield to maturity? Now, finance is really big on having words that are synonyms. Yield means interest rate. So yield to maturity means what's the interest rate from now until this is over. Present value, number of periods, future value, payment, interest rate. So this is how you find the yield to maturity. Put in the price. Put in the number of periods. Put in the $1,000 amount that's going to get paid back. Put in the interest payment. Solve for this. That is how you do the yield to maturity. That is the easy way to do it. So one of the questions that I received today was, do I use this formula? There really isn't a formula for yield. There is a formula, but the yield to maturity is part of a formula. So instead of finding the formula to find it, you simply use time value of money, use your calculator, financial calculator, use your app on your phone, use your spreadsheet, use your software, put in the variables that you have, bloop, press the one that you want. It's just that easy. And like I said before, if you go to your phone and you go to your Play Store or your iStore, you put in time value of money, it will give you so many free financial calculators. And all you do is put in what you have, solve for what you want. So if I want to find the present value, I put in the number of periods. I put in the future value, which is always 1,000. I put in the payment, which is the interest payment. I put in today's current interest rate, solve for present value. If instead I want to find the yield to maturity, I put in the future value, which is always 1,000. I put in the N, which is the number of periods until it matures. I put in the payment, which is the interest payment. I put in the present value, which I erased, and then I solve for I. That's the yield to maturity. So hear me. Number one, I like to take the complexities of this class and make it easy. Number two, I want to prepare you for the real world. And in the real business world, nobody does manual formula calculations. What they do is they make decisions based on an understanding. So that's how we want to approach this class. Not doing a whole bunch of math, but understanding what the numbers mean. So think back to my examples earlier about my weight. The weight meant different things at different parts of my life. The weight meant something different if I was gaining weight versus losing weight. The blood pressure and the what was it? And the temperature, the body temperature, they meant different things depending on how sick I was or how sick I am or how well I am, all these different things. So you're analyzing the sickness of the company, and instead of using a bunch of complex formulas, you're simply going to use time value of money. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I will post this video as soon as possible. Okay, you guys, take care.